we're, 4 or 5 months into the American component of the international pandemic that we're experiencing. And thus far, for most Americans, the aid has generally come in the form of potentially up to a $1,200 one-time payment. If you were laid off, as tens of millions were, enhanced unemployment that is going to potentially go away within 2 weeks. I'm curious, from your point of view, would you have expected that this far into a pandemic that has done so much damage in terms of loss of life and economic damage, that the assistance from the federal government would be as restrained as it's been so far?
No, it's unconscionable. I mean, right in the beginning of the pandemic in March, Tim Ryan and I said, let's give a $2,000 check to every American making under 250,000, so that they can pay their rent, so that they can pay their mortgages, so that they can have life continue. And it's not just good for them; it's good for consumer spending. And yet, while we've seen billions of dollars go to corporations, while we've seen billions of dollars of loans go to banks, while we've seen billions of dollars go to large businesses in the PPP program, we have not had that kind of relief for ordinary Americans. And that's a failure of our political process.
I've been trying to figure out, I've been listening to as many statements from different politicians as possible over the past few weeks about, if we have a second round of legislation, which it sounds like we might be moving towards, what'll be included and what won't be included. I have my suspicions, but I'm curious what you think is likely to pass and what might not make it past, for instance, the Senate.
Yeah, well, I'm always candid with you. So I think we're going to get state and local funding of some sort, but it's not going to be the $1 trillion. I do think we'll get a stimulus payment, but it's probably going to be a one-time payment, and it may have heavy restrictions in terms of the income cutoff. And I think we're going to get some extension of the unemployment insurance, but it probably isn't going to be the extra $600 a week. And if we don't get a generous enough package, again, the damage is not just to the working families and the middle class. The damage is people aren't going to have money to spend, and that's going to hurt our economic recovery.
Yeah, and I know that a number of responsible politicians for several months now have been talking about the fact that we obviously have to address the public health and financial crisis that we're in right now, but we should also acknowledge that coming up in not too much longer, potentially, we have an eviction and a mortgage crisis as well. Right. You obviously have an insider's perspective. You're speaking to these people. What is being done to forestall that? Or are we going to be hit in a month or 2 or 3 months by another massive emergency?
I think we're going to be hit. I mean, some of us have said, let's have a national moratorium on rent and mortgage payments, and let's have the federal government step in to pay. So in the case of landlords that are small business owners, but none of that has been included in the relief packages. And so you're in a situation where people are defaulting on rent, defaulting on mortgage, and at some point they may face eviction. So we need laws. We need laws saying you can't evict people for not being able to make rent or mortgage payments at a time where they're not able to work because of something beyond their control.
I'm trying to understand how political considerations play into what they're going to pass and what they're not going to pass. And it would seem to me, as a complete outsider, that on top of 135,000 plus people dying, having the economy collapse even more in the months leading up to a general election seems like a bad strategy for an incumbent president. And yet, Stephen Moore, close advisor to the president on economic matters, he was just on Sebastian Gorka's show in the last day, and he said that if they continued the unemployment payments, that the president could never be reelected, as if helping out people who've lost their jobs would actually be a detriment to him politically. I'm curious how you think politics is playing into that, and if there's any way that we can try to move past those sorts of considerations.
Oh, it's so ideological. They have this false theory that if they continue the unemployment benefits, people aren't going to return to work and the unemployment rate is going to stay high. A far likelier explanation is if they stop those unemployment payments, people aren't going to have spending money. If you're not buying things on Amazon or buying things at a local restaurant or buying food supply, you're actually going to depress the economy and have more people out of work. So what has saved this economy from going into a depression is the Fed and the congressional response, and they are talking about taking that away. I think they're just so blinded by their ideology. I personally don't know anyone who wouldn't have a job if they could have one at this time of uncertainty. And the idea that getting a $600 check a week from the government is preventing someone from work is just they haven't talked to people maybe who actually are in that circumstance.
Yeah.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.